Welcome back. You're watching Showdown, where I'm joined out of Parliament House by Tony Smith, representing the Liberal Party, as well as Ed Husic for the Labor Party. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. And joining me here in the Sky News studio from the Centre for Independent Studies, Simon Cowan, and the head of the McKell Institute, Peter Bentley. Gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Great to be with you.
Ed Husic, let me start with you. Is it responsible journalism, or was it responsible journalism by The Guardian and the ABC to broadcast and publish this sensitive material about Australia spying on the telephone of the Indonesian president?
Well, from the start of when WikiLeaks started to get reported upon, one of my concerns was early on what this would do in terms of the tenor of the diplomatic relationship between countries. But I think the debate's well and truly moved on now, given the way that these things have been reported. And I think the media is always going to want to release information that it has at hand, and at what point you get involved in this debate, it's all very subjective, I think.
So, in your view, in your subjective view, is it responsible or irresponsible journalism?
No, I just think that one of the things about our country is that we have a free press. They'll make decisions about the type of things that they report on.
Even on international issues?
You would hope. I was just going to make the point that they do it in a way that they're mindful of the type of things that they do report upon and the impacts that they have. And generally my interaction with journalists is that they are mindful of those type of things. But it's going to be obviously we've got to go through this period of obviously the tension that's injected in the relationship with Indonesia, which I suspect we're going to discuss at great length tonight. But if you have a free press, free media, this is what you must accept as part and parcel of that.
Do you agree with that, Tony Smith? I mean, yes, we have a free media, undoubtedly so, but once upon a time, at different pressure points, perhaps different international climates, of course, Cold War and so on, the media would hold back from things that were considered not to be in the national interest. Now, that has not happened in this case. Maybe that's fair, maybe it's not. What's your view?
Well, look, a couple of points, Peter. It's allegations and published as we've seen. You make a good point though about in the past. I mean, I generally agree with Ed on freedom of the press, of course, but of course in the past you had a much smaller mode of media outlets in that sense. So the difficulty now is it's just a fact of life, really, Peter, where if a media outlet, a recognised media outlet, doesn't publish something, it's going to be published on a blog site or on the web, and so on a website, I should say. So unpalatable as it is, it's a difficult situation. Overnight, I heard former President Bill Clinton make a point. I think he was in China. I heard him when I was in the gym this morning, Peter, saying that we're reaching this difficult situation where, we risk losing security and privacy.
So it's a race to the bottom, is it? I mean, that's what both of you gentlemen seem to be, in a sense, suggesting. It's a free media, like it or not, the way things are at the moment with the nature of the internet as well as social media. If mainstream media don't break this, it'll get broken on the internet anyway, so you can hardly blame mainstream media for jumping in and breaking the news. Is that the case? It's a circumstance where once upon a time it was irresponsible, but today it's just what we have to cop as part of a modern media construct?
I think it's an unfortunate fact of life. It's the times we live in, and we're never going to go back to the way things were, and it creates difficult situations.
See, from your view, Ed Husic, I mean, it's a case of just saying, isn't it, that if you're not prepared to call the reporting irresponsible, you're saying that once upon a time, pre the kind of information age that we're in, there was a hell of a lot of cover-ups of newsworthy events for excuses of national interest or some other.
Well, I mean, I didn't say that. That's the way that you've sort of injected that into the discussion. I would say that people would have taken stock in years past about what impact it might have on the relationship between countries and gone from there. But life's moved on. We have to deal with things. I was concerned, and I drew a lot of ire from people, in social media, my concern was particularly releasing information that might impact on the health and welfare of people, particularly during, in terms of the Afghan conflict and what that might have done, and in other, areas where, peacekeeping forces were working with locals on issues, and what that would lead to in terms of people's well-being. And I think those type of things should be taken into account. But again, and similar to what Tony said, that if I can paraphrase it, the caravan's moved on. This is a new reality that we're forced to deal with.
Doesn't mean we like it.
Let me bring the panel here in the Sky News studio in Simon Cowan and Peter Bentley. I think it's a really interesting question, because from the perspective of a commentator or journalist, if I was in the same position as the ABC and Guardian journalists and I received this information, would I try to publish it or broadcast it? Probably I would. But I suspect that my news director or my editor would probably jump in and not let me.
And I think the point that Tony and Ed have made is absolutely right, in that 30 years ago, kind of pre the internet, pre-Twitter, blogosphere and everything else, you may well have made that decision knowing that if you sat on it as a responsible journalist, it would never get a run.
But now you just think someone else is going to scoop you.
Absolutely. And as we were talking about that, I was kind of reminded of when you read the history of World War II, John Curtin used to bring in the editors and journalists within the press gallery and give them a briefing on what was actually happening, and then say, well, this is what I'd like you to actually write, so you're not putting Australian lives at risk when we were transporting troops through the ocean, things like that. But of course, that state of affairs doesn't exist now, and you as a journalist, your news director and others will know that if you don't give it a run, and potentially if you don't give it a run in a favourable way at this point in time, it'll be run elsewhere.
It's interesting though, because Simon Cowan, I mean, the two areas, I guess, where there have been traditional constructs of barriers put up or protection put up by the mainstream media before the age that we're in now, it's areas of national interest in international affairs, and it's private lives of politicians. And in the short time that I've been working as a commentator and journalist rather than a full-time academic, I've already seen through online media plenty of examples of the personal lives of politicians where things have been broken, stories have been revealed, which the mainstream media won't touch and will continue to not touch in some instances, even when it goes and is broadcast on social media. In other instances, they will follow. But on a number of those examples, I and other journalists have been aware of it, but we just don't touch it. Sometimes we follow when it gets broken, sometimes we don't. This is no different, is it, in the international sphere? The difference is, in this case, the Guardian and the ABC decided to lead the way on it rather than get scooped in the journalistic sphere of the Twitterverse or whatever it might be.
I think Bill Clinton's the very interesting example, because could you imagine in the current environment if he could have conducted that affair that he did with Monica Lewinsky and have that be kept secret for so long in the age of Twitter? I think the key here is the timeframes are so much shorter. You're now making that decision about whether to publish or not in minutes and hours rather than in days, because if you don't publish it, it goes on Twitter and then it's yesterday's news. And that, I think, is what's really driving a lot of this. The timeframes have become shorter and shorter and shorter, and you don't have the opportunity to sit back and say, okay, should I publish this in the national interest or not? It's just a simple yes or no decision made in the spur of a moment.
And what about this idea, Peter Bentley, of the distinguishing feature that I draw between the journalist and the editor or the news director? Because I do think, I might be wrong, I haven't spoken to either of them or any of them about this, but I suspect that even if I had this story and I wanted to run with it, I do suspect that my editor at The Australian or that my news director here at Sky News probably would have said, no, we're not going to go with that. I might be wrong.
Yeah, no, well, it's absolutely responsibility that, as you know, journalists and news directors and editors take very seriously. But I suspect, particularly when we're looking at the Edward Snowden leaks and the Manning WikiLeaks before it, we saw mainstream news outlets all around the world reporting on this, knowing that it was available, knowing that it would be run. regardless of whether they report. And so therefore it is simply a matter of kind of getting in first. And to be honest, I personally don't blame the ABC or the Guardian for doing that, because there is no doubt in my mind, we saw the PowerPoint, it would have been out there very shortly afterwards. There would be the following reporting of it. So whoever gets in first generally will give it a run.
And I'm genuinely torn on this, because on the one hand I don't disagree with the natural historical conventions about private lives as well as national interest, but by the same token, free press, as Ed Husic has said before, is also a pretty important thing. And I railed pretty hard about that when Labor was introducing media regulations that I thought got in the road of it. So it's a difficult issue. I don't think it's a clear black and white one. Tony Smith, something that does seem black and white though is that when you look at the way that Tony Abbott is handling this, it may well be true what he is saying, that all countries do this, but I'm surprised at the lack of contrition in his tone. Refusing to apologise, he's using the words regret. This could all be blown over a lot quicker if he just followed the American approach in relation to Germany and didn't hold such a strong line on this. How do you defend it?
Well, look, I thought he made a very calm, considered and steadfast statement to the Parliament today. There are a number of aspects to it, as you know, that went to...
Oh, it was calm, considered and steadfast, but he basically told Idiono to get stuffed.
No, I mean, he made a number of points about the government's approach and the reasons for it, that Australia wasn't going to apologise for intelligence gathering, which most nations do, and in our case we do so for national security reasons and the benefit of our allies. He made the other point that Australia is not in a position to detail what it does. But he did stress the strength of the relationship, his strong view of the President of Indonesia being a great friend of Australia, and acknowledged very candidly that this is a very difficult issue.
But seriously, Tony Smith, you say that the strength of the relationship. I doubt that you and I would have much of a working relationship if I was listening in on your telephone calls.
Well, I'll just draw you back to the point I made from the Prime Minister's statement, that Australia's not in a position, Peter, to detail what modes of operation it has, just as it's not in a position to confirm or deny these sorts of allegations and stories.
The horse is bolted on that one, though, isn't it? The horse is bolted on that. We've got the PowerPoints. We know that we've been intercepting the phone calls of Idiono.
Well, as you've heard the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister, we don't comment on national security matters. He made it very clear. I think it's better to be honest in the Parliament of Australia about our approach, and that is that Australia won't apologise for gathering intelligence and the reasons for that. Now, I think a candid, calm, steadfast statement to the Parliament was the right course of action, and yes, it's a difficult situation. He also acknowledged candidly this morning that in a strong relationship that we have with Indonesia, today is a difficult day, certainly not the best day, but we need to work through this difficult issue, and I think having a candid statement to the Parliament was the right way to go. For
those of you that are catching up on this evening with this news today, we're just going to play a quick excerpt of the Foreign Minister of Indonesia expressing his, what can only be described as, displeasure at the situation. Take a look.
The roadmap must be pretty obvious, an explanation, an official explanation, and a commitment to the future that no longer would such activity be conducted.
Ed Husic, why shouldn't we apologise for spying on the President of Indonesia? I mean, it strikes me that intelligence gathering is one thing, but spying on the leader of an ally, that's got to be another, doesn't it?
I think, I mean, I certainly agree with Tony on the need for, you know, being calm and measured on this.
Calm and measured? You guys seem like you're on Mogadon tonight. I mean, you've been more than calm and measured.
Bill Shorten did, you know, indicate to the Parliament today that this is, as we all know, one of the most important relationships we have is with Indonesia. That through this strain, as a result of the situation that we're going through now, that we do need to work to rebuild it. We stand ready to work with the government in ensuring that, one, we restate the importance of the relationship, and that we work to smooth this over with the Indonesians, and that, as was indicated earlier, that the way in which we do that, the tone, the approach that's taken, that we can move things in a much better, much more productive way. And you referred earlier to the way in which Barack Obama and Angela Merkel moved to repair the situation.
Well, that's what you and Bill
instance,
Shorten want to happen, isn't it? I mean, that's your not so implicit criticism of Tony Abbott here, is that he needs to move to Obama's approach vis-a-vis Merkel rather than his current approach vis-a-vis Yudhoyono.
Well, I think in this case, where on a whole range of areas, having a strong relationship with Indonesia matters. And if we can see an improvement in the relationship, that will obviously be of benefit to both countries. And certainly I think toning the words down a bit might be of assistance. And looking at other examples elsewhere wouldn't hurt.
All right, hold that thought. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to continue on this issue, which really is dominating the week, and I suspect will dominate the month. That is to say, Australia spying on the phone, the mobile phone of the Indonesian president, and what that means, and we'll get to some of this shortly in the program, what that means for other aspects of our relationship with our closest neighbour. You're watching Showdown.
At Shell, we're working hard to broaden the world's energy mix, supplying natural gas for the generation of electricity with around half the CO2 emissions of coal, producing biofuel made from renewable sugarcane with our partner in Brazil, and here in Australia, finding ways to fuel our future. Let's broaden the world's energy mix. Let's go.
Superior performance. It's what you've come to expect from an Audi. What you wouldn't expect is that for a limited time, when you purchase an Audi A1, A4, A6 or Q7, the drive-away price will be reduced by an amount equal to the GST. It's all the performance for less.
I'm done smooching Mrs. Muggles. I need something back.
I taste that sticky syrup on my lips.
I'm hungry. Can we have Thai for dinner?
What about pizza?
Yeah, pizza.
Menu log it.
Menulog.com.au. With over 2,000 restaurants and 6,000 specials, it's #1 for ordering takeaway online.
We're boosting Queensland's economy by $32 billion over 10 years, but we're not a bank. We're creating jobs for nearly 12,000 people, but we're not an employment agency. We're QGC. Together, we're doing good things for Queensland.
Authorised R. Millhouse QGC Brisbane.
Is your vision as good as it can be? OPSM tested the eyes of 100 people and found that 74 of them require help to see more clearly. So to help you identify if your eyes need testing, we've created the free OPSM Eye Check app. Download it now or book an OPSM eye test today. OPSM loves eyes.
What do we want? More flavour. When do we want it? Now. What do we want?
Praise deli-style aioli. Treat your food to cafe-style taste.
I could eat myself.
Praise.
So, you living with your folks much longer?
Thankfully not. We spoke to Rams and you're right, we only need a 5% deposit. They've been upfront about everything and will take us through the process step by step.
See, it's not that hard to get a room.
Oh, hi Raymond.
Oh, Mrs. Harris. Didn't see you there.
Get into your own home quicker. Call 13RAMS or jump online. RAMS, simply better.
Welcome back. You're watching Showdown. I'm joined in the nation's capital by Ed Husic, representing the Labor Party, as well as Tony Smith for the Liberals, and here in the Sky News studio, Simon Cowan from the Centre for Independent Studies and Peter Bentley, the head of the McKell Institute. Ed Husic, let me come to you now. There's been lots of things that we've seen, problems that have occurred that have been inherited, I suppose, by Tony Abbott, some of which you dispute, others you might accept. But the last thing that he probably expected that he'd inherit when he got government on the 7th of September was a spying saga that you guys created back in 2009. Who else were you spying on back then?
Well, I'd be very careful about making those statements, Peter, just because, as you know, Tony's indicated earlier, in terms of intelligence matters, you need to, one, recognise that it's, you know, obviously that a lot of countries are doing it, particularly from a national security perspective, and it's probably not the best place to be discussing them.
Yeah, but it was you guys doing the spying. You acknowledge that. 2009, Kevin Rudd was Prime Minister, first time around, not second. Labor was presiding over a regime that was spying on our neighbour. End of story.
Well, I'm going to avoid being flippant about without knowing the full details, particularly on an issue as sensitive as this.
All right, we'll move on to the Indonesian boats. Tony Smith, I want to ask you about this. We had Angus Campbell, the General charged with standing next to Scott Morrison and nodding for Operation Sovereign Borders. He was fronting Senate estimates this evening, in fact, and he made it clear under questions from Sarah Hanson-Young that not one boat has been bought back under the buyback scheme as of now, and he also made it clear that Indonesia's got a problem with that, and obviously you'd assume their problem with it has only been exacerbated by the latest 48 hours worth of revelations. No buybacks. Are you expecting any this side of the new year?
Well, the point he made and the point the ministers made is that policy that we took to the election remains available. The General gave an accurate description today at estimates. We want to pursue every policy we can to stop the boats. We're succeeding. They haven't stopped, but they're stopping. We've had a 75% reduction, but
yeah, but it's obviously got nothing to do with buybacks. You'd have to accept that because there haven't been any.
Well, the point that both the minister and the General made is Indonesia, of course, at this point in time, aren't wanting to progress that policy, but it remains available. Well, look, this is a difficult issue, and as you've heard many times from the Minister for Operational Matters, you can't go into every single detail, but
yeah, but this isn't an operational matter. We know that the reason is because it's an absurd policy, wasn't it? I mean, I went on boatsales.com.au earlier, and there's a lot of boats for sale in Australia. People have just got to ship them over to Indonesia and try to get a buck for them. It'd also help you guys out because then you might actually buy a few.
Peter, the important point is our suite of policies are working. The Australian public know they're working. We've got a way to go, but we have had early success, and that is there for all to see. And it's in everyone's interest that we stop the boats entirely, and that's what we're working towards. I freely admit that you and your colleagues in the media would prefer that we operated in a different way, but the important thing from a public perspective is that the policies work, and we've got early success, and clearly on this one, obviously it remains available, as I've said.
In terms of actual implementation, Ed Husic, not that much has changed when the government changed. We do have temporary protection visas, Ed Husic. They weren't in play as Tony Smith was talking about the changes there. But let me ask you, is it simply a case that Indonesian people smugglers think that the coalition has more resolve to stop the boats than Labor did? Because let's be honest, you guys flip-flopped all over the place with different options, and you only came up with the PNG solution, which is probably what's doing most of the stopping, late in the piece. Is it a case that the people smugglers see the coalition now in power, and as a result of seeing the coalition in power, they think, geez, we're better come up with some new tactics here because these guys actually are committed to a policy of stopping the boats?
Well, a number of things. I don't think the way that Scott Morrison has structured a media conference has had any impact on the way that, you know, people smugglers have or haven't put people on vessels. I think what's had the biggest impact has been the agreement, the resettlement agreement that we reached with Papua New Guinea, which you'll recall before the election.
So you guys just unlucky. You did it too late to get the credit for it. Government changes.
If I can finish my point, we put that agreement in place in in mid-July. At the time, you recall, we had a number of senior front benchers on the coalition side say that the agreement was unravelling, that it wasn't going to work, it wasn't going to see the light of day, offended PNG, suggesting that we were just, in terms of, that PNG would have a call on the way that aid was used, which the PNG angrily rejected. And that agreement had more of an impact than anything that Scott Morrison has or hasn't done in a media conference. The other thing I'd make in reference to your interjection is if we'd had the ability, for instance, to get the Malaysia agreement in place, we may have already seen back then drops in those arrival numbers as well. We didn't, because the coalition teamed up with the Greens on the floor of the House of Representatives to stop our amendments going through post the High Court changes to the agreement. And I guess the other point I'd make is we have the farcical situation where we ask questions of the Minister in question time in the Federal Parliament as to what's happening with the boat buyback. He refuses to answer. We get to estimates just down the few halls away, and we get the answer from the ADF that not a boat's been purchased. We knew that this was a dud of a policy before the election, and we're now seeing that come to light post.
How do you respond to that, Tony Smith? I mean, it's not unfair to say that element of the policy mix is a dud.
Well, let me respond on the point you tried to make, which, I mean, from Ed's perspective and the Labor Party's perspective, let's just get this clear. They got elected in 2007. There was no problem, absolutely no problem at all. They unravelled the Howard government policies. I just want to have this clear in my head. They then, in doing so, created a monumental problem.
Can I just get something else clear in your head, though, Tony Smith? No, because you're right about that, but you've got to also accept that Sharman Stone, as the Shadow Immigration Minister, supported the closing down of detention centres that were offshore. She did support it. It's in the transcript, an interview that she did with Tony Jones, I believe.
Well, look, I'm not sure of that, Peter. But the point's this: Kevin Rudd took a perfectly settled policy situation and unravelled it. He took a policy on TPVs, he unravelled it, and they created a monumental problem. And now Labor wants the public to believe that actually they solved it just in their dying days before the election. Look, on Scott Morrison's weekly press conference, I absolutely defend that. I mean, it is obvious for all to see that people smugglers should be denied information. They shouldn't get shipping news, as he's put it. Every aspect you can use to disrupt their communication methods has an effect. And in the few months since the election, it's a 75% reduction, as I've said. Now, what Labor should do is support what we're doing. I mean, having run to an election, formed government back in 2007 and created this huge problem that they weren't able to solve, I don't think the public are going to think, Peter, that they're the experts on solving the problem. I really don't.
Peter, the thing that came out through estimates is, I just want to tackle this whole notion that, Scott Morrison can't hand over information because the people smugglers will find out and this will disrupt them. It came out that the Australian Maritime Safety Agency maintains a public broadcast system that lets people know and can be listened into and can be broadcast over as to what boats are or aren't arriving. People can find that out at Christmas Island or elsewhere. The idea that if you turn back a boat and it arrives back to Indonesia and the people smugglers won't know that will occur is just a simple joke. What's happening here is that Scott Morrison, this isn't about operationally why he doesn't want to release it. It's politically unpalatable for him to release the fact that nothing that they've done has changed the way in which this is being managed, that the resettlement agreement has had the biggest impact, and that Scott Morrison is effectively realising that slogans don't translate into policy grunt.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Gentlemen, out of Canberra, Ed Husic representing the Labor Party, Tony Smith for the Liberals. Thanks very much for your company on this episode of Showdown. See you later, gentlemen.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you.
Just before we go to a break, I just want to get the views of the panel here on this issue. Now, this whole debate about whether Operation Sovereign Borders and its secrecy plays an impact, or has an impact, or plays a role, however minor, however major, in the reduction in boats. It's hard to get around the fact that a 75% reduction on the stats the last 2 months compared to the previous 2 months. Whatever your view on this, it's hard to argue with the fact that the coalition looked pretty damn good with that being the case, Peter Bentley.
Well, my view is the policy that has led to this is the PNG solution.
Yeah, but that was a back-of-the-envelope policy at the last moment.
To be fair, we saw the decline in the first 6 weeks under Labor. We've seen a continued decline under the coalition. But as we were talking about this before, I was thinking back to our first segment in talking about news that's being released.
But if that was such an important policy, Peter Bentley, it came so late. And all this argument about the Malaysian solution on paper was a dog alongside PNG in terms of deterrence.
Well, I disagree. And it was Peter Debnant, who is a former Liberal leader, as a former Navy officer, said about a year ago that when he was directly asked what is the one policy at that point in time that you think would be the most effective, he said the Malaysian solution. So I think it had potential, but certainly if anyone could have their time again, I think there's little argument that the PNG solution should have been implemented sooner. But in terms of the secrecy, when we've got a state of affairs where we're getting our information now from the Jakarta Post, we're getting the information anyway. The people smugglers are getting the information anyway. The only people that are being starved of information are the Australian public, and that seems to be more for political reasons than actually stopping people smuggling.
All right, we're going to leave this issue there, Simon Cameron. When we come back, we're going to talk about the economy. That's your fertile ground. You're watching Showdown. We'll be back in a moment.